There's no videos. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me or my background, I did grow up in a church-going family, and we have a nice little typical Sunday best photo. There we go. So this is me on the left of the screen feeding one of my cousins, and like any 80s mum, my mum would consistently dress me and my sister matching in some kind of rah-rah outfit. And there's my brother and his little church shoes and socks on there and messy hair. Yeah, so basically I just wanted to kind of paint this picture of like this not chapel going, you know, it was like genuine, vibrant faith. But I think what I really struggled with was no one in school went to church, and I went to a really small valley school, and there was 10 of us in my year, which my kids are always like, 10? I was like, yes. There was 4 girls in my year and 6 boys, and it was a small school. Everybody knew each other, and I think we were the only church-going family. And I was just kind of labelled like, oh, they the church-going family. And what people's perception of that is, even as kids, is, oh, she's the goody two-shoes. And that just didn't sit right with me, you know? Like, I knew stories of people with genuine radical faith. So, like, I'd grown up hearing these stories of, like, my great-grandfather who came to know Jesus through like a spiritual like awakening at the turn of the century in 1904. You can Google it, 1904 revival in Wales, and there was just like this move of God through this country. My great-grandfather came to know Jesus in a really powerful way then, came out of the like established religious church that he was part of in our village, and just started to meet in his home with like his family and a couple of neighbours. And they started to just like study the Bible together and just like live life following Jesus, which was really radical for that time. Like, you know, really like out of the norm. And they decided to start a Sunday school. But in those days, a Sunday school wasn't for children. The Sunday school was literally to teach the minors how to read and write by teaching them the Bible. So that was my great-grandfather, and the church that I grew up in actually grew out of that group of people who used to meet in their living room and decided to start teaching local people who couldn't read and write how to read and write to like better their lives, but to teach them about God at the same time. And then my grandparents on my dad's side, and these are my grandparents that I spent a lot of time with as a kid, hanging out with them. They were super influential over me. They were radical followers of Jesus as well, even though like they were very like, you know, wore a shirt and tie, and, you know, she wore pearls, and they were known as Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. But they were radical for their time. They got married in, it was probably something like 1948. As soon as they were married, they signed up to go and be missionaries in India for 5 years, no return. So they were literally married. You know, anybody like with any sense these days wouldn't be like, yeah, get married, jump on a ship, go to India for 5 years, don't have any contact with your family. Do you know what I mean? Like, go and live in the jungle for 5 years. That's what they did, because they were so sold out for like teaching people how to, you know, live for Jesus. And this wasn't about like taking, so I really struggled with this in the past couple of months with the whole like, you know, political correctness in terms of like, oh, I'm going off on a little tangent here. I've thought about this, like, was this imperialism, right? I'm just going to go on a little tangent here. Was this imperialism? Was this like the British Empire? No. This was my grandparents passionate about equipping local Indian people in the mountains, the jungle mountains of Shillong, to be local people who knew Jesus, to be able to teach their own people about Jesus. And so this wasn't about expanding the British Empire, right? because that's something I've been like, Anyway, so
is this just to raise a question? For most of you know Katie. So are you saying this is genetic? This crazy?
No. Okay. So my point is,
it's in the genes.
Okay, it might be in the genes a little bit, but my point is that I was hearing these stories about these people who turned their lives upside down because of the influence of Jesus, right? But my kind of weekly experience of church, and bless you know, like I love the people of the Mission Hall. I love them, you know, like my family. But they were people who went to church and wore hats and, you know, wore shirt and tie, and, you know, were they like radically living for Jesus? I couldn't see it. I know their faith was genuine. I know their faith was genuine, but I think what I couldn't marry was, there's something in me, as is in my makeup, in my personality, like I seek adventure and purpose, and I need a purpose for living, and I think that is part of who I am. And I knew that living for Jesus could give you that drive and that purpose, but as a like 10, 12, 13-year-old in the church setting I couldn't see anybody who was living like that radically. And therefore, the kids around me in school who said, you know, you go to church like that, or you're not allowed to swear, or you're not allowed to come to parties on a Sunday because you've got to go to church. Those were the influences that were louder, I guess. And I was like, oh, I don't want to be goody two shoes. And I guess there was just something that wasn't connecting with me, right? And so my perception of church became about what I couldn't do, what I was not allowed to do, not allowed to swear, not allowed to go out on a Friday evening, you know, to the youth club because I had to go to the church youth club, not allowed to watch certain films, or do you know what I mean? Like,
or shave your head.
Just it became what I was about, what I was not allowed to do, rather than about what I was free to do. And so there was like this skewed impression of what being a Christian was, that pushed me away, I guess, from like the truth of who Jesus is. And so I guess as a young teenager, I was like searching for where do I find freedom? Where do I find purpose? Where do I find like something like latch my identity onto and shape myself around? Yeah. So there was lots of like different eras of Katie Jenkins, but
you'll love this one.
I'm gonna go into like the most prominent one, because I don't have time to go through them all, because there were different morph versions of me. So this is me. Zoom back out. I look like a cave woman. Okay. Are we still on screen or not?
Yeah, don't use them back. So
that was like a little picture of me. Have we turned our camera off?
Sorry.
Oh, read that off, bless me. What's that?
It's just showing the attitude of the church. It was always, as you're saying, don't do this, don't do that. I always remember Pastor Len coming to lecture my parents about the music that my brother used to, you know, enjoy, and he was wrong. And he was, you know, my parents still have the don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, and you know, shouldn't dye your hair. If God wanted you to have red hair, He'd given it to you, and all this. And yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So I knew you'd be able to identify with like certain bits of that, but not to like put down that church, because you know they are like gorgeous, lovely people, family, absolutely family, and like. And
ironically, Leslie, I suppose even in our early years together, it was a church even more liberated than my church background, so allowed Katie and Sarah to express what church was, explore, so it gave freedom to
evolve,
young people. And so, yeah, so I think we look back with mixed feelings.
Yeah,
but,
no,
but
and
when you're
really
younger, you're working that stuff out, aren't you?
yeah, and it was
you can feel
it was like part of my journey as well, wasn't it? Like discovering Jesus for myself.
Yeah.
So
what was that picture about?
yeah, so that picture was before smartphones were invented.
Thankfully.
Yeah, thank the Lord. And before social media was invented. I guess as a 12, 13-year-old, looking for something to like find my purpose in, and I got really passionate about like being like this kind of like activist, I guess, for like environmentalism and animal welfare rights, and I was vegetarian, and I was washing my hair with vegan soap before that was even trendy.
Yeah, I love that part. Yeah.
And you know, this is like literally 20 years ago. You know, like wearing like a t-shirt that said like ban live exports, because that was like a big thing that was being protested at the time. And where I'm from in the Swansea Valley, around about the it wouldn't be the late 90s, mid 90s, there was people who camped out in certain forests. Now, people who are like the same age as me or older, you'll remember in the mid 90s there was like this whole tree people like thing going on, and eco warriors, and like there was like the Newbury bypass campaign, there was like a Manchester airport campaign, and there was also the open cast mining campaigns that were like dotted through the Welsh valleys, and I lived close by two of these. And so it just so happened that I was around about the time, like being like 13, 14, like able to like catch buses, places and stuff like that, and go places after school without my parents being too concerned. And I started hanging out with a camp of people who were camping in a nearby woodland near a place called Ystrad. And I would absolutely say that like for like 2 years of my life, this became like my purpose for living. And I was loving it. I was loving life. Like I was known as, like, you know, Katie the tree person. And even though that wasn't cool and it wasn't trendy, I didn't care. It wasn't about like being accepted necessarily. It was about having a sense of identity. And for me, this was something really worthwhile pouring my energy into. And I did dabble around with like exploring faith things at that time. Like a lot of the people I was hanging out with, you know, were like new age kind of people with like more pagan kind of like mindsets and faith outlooks. And I did like look into that a little bit, but it was weird. Even though a lot of that was really attractive to me, I just had this like real awareness that I knew God was real. And even though I knew I was like in effect kind of turning my back on a relationship with him at that point, I was very aware that he was real and he was there. And I was very aware of like a line that I wasn't going to cross, because I knew that spiritual things were real. And I knew that, you know, certain things like potentially that like lead into witchcraft, I knew that those things were things I wanted to avoid. I just like had this sense in my spirit, like I wasn't going to cross a line there. But where I did cross lines and where lines were really blurred was like, what would I smoke, or, you know, what would I drink, or like what the relationships I started to explore were like. And 90% of that stuff, you know, no, not 90%. I was going to say 90% of that stuff was good. As a 14-year-old, no, it wasn't. And if my 14-year-old was doing it, I'd be horrified. But there was one relationship that happened, whereas all the other guys I hung out with, obviously were all older than me, but I saw them like family, and they treated me like family, and they accepted me and, you know, loved me and like looked after me, I guess, because I was younger, and kind of, yeah, took on this kind of like older brother, older sister role. But there was one relationship that, you know, was wrong. And I was 14 and this guy was 23. And he knew I was 14. And at the time, I didn't feel like he was taking advantage, or I didn't feel like I was being violated or, you know, abused at all. But looking back, I think as I got older and older, the more I kind of looked back on that, kind of, there was like more and more realization of, gosh, I really was wrong. But what happened was, like, there were absolute crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed in a relationship with this guy, that did, like, it did stuff to my head. And, like, you know, there was like memories of stuff that would like go on loop in my mind, like when I was like trying to go to bed at night or whatever, and it was just dark. It was really dark, and it wasn't healthy, it wasn't wholesome. Basically what happened was, a parent of another set of kids that would come up to visit that camp, he knew my parents, and he saw me going into this guy's caravan on my own, and told my parents that he thought there was something going on that shouldn't have been going on. And I was in year 10 in school, and my parents, obviously, like, they couldn't ignore that, and this literally put me on lockdown, and took all of my freedom away, didn't give me any money. At that, you know, the mobile phones didn't exist then anyway, but I wasn't allowed to, like, ever go there again, ever. And I don't know if you haven't been through a situation like that, I don't think you can comprehend what that does to a person, like, where your whole like friendship circle, purpose for living, identity, reason for like getting up and out every day suddenly gets like totally taken away from you. I think now you'd probably say that I went into like a phase of like maybe depression, but at the time, you know, I was 15, and, you know, basically my parents just grounded me. I mean, that's what it was really, my parents had grounded me. But I genuinely think, like, in hindsight, for about 12 months, I just lived on autopilot. I just had no, like, spiritual or mental, like, life. Like, that just sounds a bit bizarre, but I just did every day. Like, just, like, did year 11 in school, like, managed to, like, pull my grades up, because, like, up to that point, I hadn't really taken school very seriously. Didn't come back, you know, didn't kind of consider God as a solution at that point, because God had always been something that had been walked in my mind about, like, to have a relationship with God, I felt like I needed to meet a standard of living, and like a moral standard, which has just been something that has just warped in my brain from like years of going to Sunday school and like being taught all these Bible stories, but never really clicking about what Christianity really was. And so I felt like Christianity wasn't something that I could then turn to as like a relief, or something that would welcome me in. It's like, no, like, I had fallen so far down from grace in terms of being welcomed by God, that I just, you know, I think just kind of zombied spiritually and mentally for about a year. But I managed to get some decent GCSE grades, so hey, every cloud. And And you can ask me a question, but you're going to let me ramble. What's the time?
Keep going.
Oh, shoot. Okay. So, I haven't looked at my notes for ages.
So you went from being central to a community to now having no community and dull. Where did life start from there?
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah. So thankfully, I haven't made a big thing of this because I'm aware that this potentially might go on YouTube, which then my kids might watch at some point. But when I'd been hanging out with my friends and like going to house parties and stuff, like, you know, before my lockdown, it was really normal for me to smoke weed, even if, you know, I was hanging out with my school friends and they weren't smoking weed, I would. But something weird happened when my parents grounded me. It was like I had the maturity to think, do you know what, that part of my life that's a social thing that I do. That's a social thing that I do with my friends who I hang out with and we have a good time together. And so when that social aspect was taken away, it was like, I'm not bothered, you know, like I'm not bothered about doing that anymore, which was amazing. I think it's a real grace of God in my life, because I think if I'd gone to uni, for example, and hadn't like got that out of my system, I would have gone on to much harder drugs, I think, at uni. But it was just like, no, draw a line, you know, in terms of like that. And then the question was, do I stay in school for sixth form, or do I go to a sixth form college? Originally my plan had been to go travelling at 16, but that didn't happen.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. I genuinely wanted to leave school before my GCSEs and go travelling, shave my head and just go, but that didn't happen. But school, the teachers and like the, you know, the, what's the English word, like the leadership of the school, obviously it pigeonholed me into like a troublemaker, drug taker. In fairness, I was. And so, you know, the thought of me staying on for sixth form, I wasn't going to have any of the perks of being a sixth former, because I didn't deserve them. And even though I had, you know, changed my life, the school didn't believe that I'd really changed my life. So I was just like, you know what, I need to get out of this place, like where I'm like labelled as this person, and decided to go to a sixth form college. Now, this is where it gets like exciting, because I thought I needed to like reinvent myself. But little did I know that like God was like actually really going to reinvent me like over that summer of my life, like after my GCSEs. So every year, my parents would like desperately hope that they would send me off on these Christian camps, and they would desperately hope every year that I might come home transformed and like, you know, what's the word, like I can't think of the word, but you know, I would come home as a good girl. And it never happened. And it was almost like I would go to these camps and have like a, you know, a real blast and hear about Jesus on these camps and just have that same mentality, like I can't live that standard of like what a Christian is, like I have to sort my life out before I come to Jesus. I had this total misunderstanding, and it was almost like I had a penny drop moment. I went on one of these summer camps, like after my GCSEs, totally spiritually, mentally bankrupt, right? At this point, I felt like, you know, I'd lived about 30 years of my life in 15. And the stories I could tell the other 15-year-olds, they were just like, oh, shoot, like, who is this kid? And the guy who was like, the preacher, I guess, so like every evening they would like have like this talk for, you know, there's like 50 kids or whatever on this camp. And remember I was talking about these radical followers of Jesus, like in, you know, in my history, and I'd never like met one, you know, like one that I felt like, you know, I could be like. But this preacher guy had been a jazz musician in London, and he'd been an alcoholic. And I can't remember how he'd met Jesus. Somebody had like told him about Jesus, that, you know, Jesus like brought freedom, Jesus brings forgiveness, Jesus brings like, you know, wholeness and forgiveness and purpose. And this guy Mike had like given his life to Jesus and like totally transformed his life from being a jazz musician to preaching on the streets of London. Like that, it was, and he just oozed excitement for Jesus. And I was like, that's what I want to be like. I was like, that is the kind of follower of Jesus that like I've imagined in my head, but never like seen in real life. And I was like, oh, there's actually one in real life. And I just like listened to this guy intently. And I can't remember whether there was that the week where he said, if you're going to follow Jesus?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell this bit?
Yeah, so on these camps, they're quite a traditional setup, and I think I'm just wondering which bit you were gonna suggest.
It doesn't matter. I'm really aware it's 20 to 9. So. Anyway, so I'm just gonna tell you this like funny story. Yeah, so like these camps weren't like kind of like, yeah, put your hands in the air like you just don't care, praise Jesus. These were like, you know, you sing quite kind of like formally, and you know, anyway. But Mike, this guy, he wasn't like your traditional, like that type of like preacher guy. And I think it was one evening towards the end of the week, and he was like, are you going to stand for Jesus? And like that's, and he was like, come on, who's going to stand for Jesus? And he was like looking at this like room full of 50 kids, and like everybody is just like looking at him like that. And I was just like, I am. And I was just standing there like, I'm ready to go. You know, what are we doing? What are we doing for Jesus? And apparently, Steve tells me later that like he wasn't like actually literally asking people to stand, but I stood up, and then the rest of the room stood up, and we were like, yeah, we're going to stand for Jesus. And so basically, I left school that summer. I had this like realization that I had nothing to bring to the plate, right? I had nothing to bring to the table for Jesus. I had spent out on like trying to achieve and trying to find a drive and trying to have purpose. And it had like gone toxic, and it had, you know, got polluted, and it had been robbed from me, and it left me empty, and it left me hurt, and left me, you know, yeah, bankrupt, I guess, inside. And I realized that week that like this Jesus that I had assumed I had to bring my morality to was actually saying, no, you come empty-handed, Katie. You come empty-handed because I'm asking you to surrender. I'm not asking you, Katie, to achieve for me. I'm asking you to surrender your life to me. And I was just like, yeah, I can surrender because I know I've got nothing to give. And everything that I've tried this far has like brought me back to zero. And so I'm here with zero. And so if that's all that you need, then yeah, you can have my zero, because I have nothing to bring to this table. And you know what? I didn't feel, although yeah, I stood in that meeting, right? But I didn't go into sixth form college feeling full of power and like, you know, like I was going to be like this radical, like follower of Jesus. I went to sixth form, like genuinely thinking, I'm going to give this a shot. Nobody knows me. If it comes up in conversation, I'm going to just say, I'm Christian, and I'm not going to have any expectation on myself because I know I'm going to fail. but I'm just going to like literally see how it goes. And I can not even tell you how amazing God was in providing for me like the most amazing group of friends who were radical followers of Jesus. This is just, it's unheard of, like genuine, like God is so kind because he knew what I needed. Like I'm so weak, and he just provided for me like this group of friends in my sixth form college, and they were hip-hop DJs and break dancers. They were like the cool kids, right? And I was like, yes, I'm with them. I believe Jesus. I believe in Jesus, and I'm one of those, you know. I totally haven't followed my notes at all. But the point of this is, I decided I was going to live with purpose and passion for Jesus. And that hasn't been something that I've had to muster up myself. That has been something that from that very first point of surrender, like, Jesus, will you take my mess and my emptiness, and will you fill it with your life and your passion and your freedom? And from that moment when I was 16 years old, he has just given me more life, more purpose, and more passion, to the point where I know now that there is like 1,000 times more of purpose and passion and freedom that Jesus has still got for me to discover. And one thing I will say is, I think like the church is beautiful because the church is made up of so many different people, different kinds of people, like different giftings, different personalities, different people, different shapes and different sizes. And it is like literally, the church is the most multifaceted social expression you will ever come across, because it displays the beauty and the fullness of God. And I've always been somebody to like shy away from the norm and push for, okay, so if there's somebody who will never walk into a traditional church, how can I take Jesus to them? And that's just who God has made me. But God has made other people differently. And isn't that amazing that like we all differently fit together because God's made us for a purpose? And I loved Ellie's story last week, and I just loved how she was so honest and comfortable in saying, like, you know, that when she went to uni, she wasn't interested in going out, she wasn't interested in drinking, but she loved the people who were like you know, on her, you know, in her flat, who did all that, but she was totally okay with who she was. When I went to uni, I was absolute party girl, like. And isn't that amazing that like both me and Ellie both love Jesus, but both totally different in our personalities and our expressions. But I was like, do you know what? There's a party in my heart because Jesus has put it there. I'm going to go out and party every night as a student because there's kids in the clubs snorting coke and taking E, and they don't know about Jesus. So I'm going to go there and drink my Red Bull and party hard, but tell them about Jesus. And there's still that kind of like aspect of me, even though I don't go out every night anymore. There's still that aspect of me of like, there's people who will never come to traditional church, but everybody needs to hear about Jesus, because everybody is created to know him. Everybody is created with this emptiness in their heart that can only be filled by knowing Jesus and the freedom that comes through Jesus. And so I will do my utmost to go to the places where those people who haven't heard Jesus can hear about Jesus. The end. It's 10 to 9. Do you want to see a picture of me as a party girl?
Katie wants you to see her, seeing as you've seen the rest. Guys, if people need to go, then feel free. We won't be offended. Same deal as ever. Obviously, you'll want to see this first. Oh, you can see it. There we are.
Woohoo! Look at that pint of Red Bull. Keep me going till 5 in the morning.
Okay. So I didn't ask her questions because if I asked her questions, she'd talk even more. We've been married that long. If people want to come off audio or want to send us questions for Katie, we can do that.
Go on the audio, you mean?
Yeah, if people want to, it's nice to have conversation, not just. So if people want to speak, then feel free. Otherwise, bye, Fee. Thank you. Any questions?
Oh.
Emma's had to go. Baby screaming. Oh dear. Okay. Anyone? We're going quiet, guys.
Doesn't matter.
Everyone wants to stay on, but no one wants to ask any questions.
So I tell you another story. No,
Who said no?
no, I
Well,
didn't.
there's a couple of thumbs up. What story are you going to tell?
About my tattoo.
Okay. Cool.
So, there's a hilarious story about this tattoo on my back. I didn't want to show it to you in real life, so I got Steve to take a close up so you don't see my back fat. And he zoomed in on it. Hang on, let's show you the tattoo.
Sorry, guys.
Okay, so basically, there it is. Ichthus is ancient Greek for fish. I'll tell you like the background of that story. So when I was about 18 or 19, I was still a student. It was before my 3rd year of university. There was this woman offering temporary tattoos, right, in Swansea, and I still got the business card to prove that I wasn't like off my face on drugs, because I wasn't at that point. I was following Jesus. Temporary tattoos, 3 to 5 years. I was like, oh, do you know what? That's not too much of a commitment, is it? I'm gonna have a tattoo on my lower back so that when I go out, it can like generate conversations about the gospel. And so, because I used to wear crop tops, and like back in like the early 2000s, like, do you remember like those low-rise jeans that were massive at the bottom, like literally the jeans that were like that big at the bottom? Oh, I loved them. And so I had this favorite pair of jeans, and I positioned this tattoo just above where those jeans like finish at the bottom of my back, and below where crop top would be. And it says, and so when I go out to clubs, people would be like, oh, what's your tattoo mean? And I'd be like, funny you ask. It actually means Jesus Christ, God's Son, Saviour. And then generally they'd go, oh. And 3 to 5 years, still blinking there, bright as day. It hasn't faded at all. 20 years later, how many years later? No, 18 years later.
Time.
Anyway.
It's not temporary, that's for sure.
That's my Ichthus tattoo. So yeah, so for people who don't know what Ichthus is, it's ancient Greek for fish. And when the Christians in the New Testament had to gather underground, because being a Christian was like against the law, and you'd get arrested and like you'd get thrown to the lions, they had this like symbol that was the symbol of a fish, like the outline of a fish, and sometimes you might see them on the backs of cars, or on like people's bracelets or whatever. And the word Ichthus stood for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Saviour. That's cool, isn't it?
So I've got a question. All that story only gets to uni years. It's been a lot of years since. How does all that affect the way you live and what you do and the energies that you do it in? because I'm like the rest of you. I watch it whiz around like a Tasmanian devil, thinking where'd she get this energy from? Some of that is genes, but otherwise, how is your story continue today?
Yeah, so
your purpose, your identity.
I have watched. So I think what my worst nightmare would be is a middle class mediocre Christian, and I think I'd rather just not. I'd rather like go out and go drinking every weekend than be a mediocre. Like that's not who Jesus has called people to be like. It's so you look at the life of Jesus in the New Testament. So forget like all the people that I heard about in my history, or Mike Mello was that alcoholic jazz musician. Just look at the life of Jesus and the way he lived and the way he called his disciples to live. It was countercultural, like nonsensical, non-logical, faith-filled, extravagant, generous, life-giving life. And I know I can't live like that most of the time, because you have to be so like living closely to Jesus, like like breathing him in and day out to be like that. And I just don't have that kind of discipline. But if I can breathe him in just enough to have like one moment of that a week, then those moments are worth pursuing, because knowing Jesus is so life-giving that nothing else even compares. Does that answer your question? No.
Yeah.
I'm aware now it's 5 to 9.
No questions here. You've done it all. No one's asking any questions.
So this is the last Thursday night Zoom. This is my story. We have like massively appreciated people tuning in and joining us for these. And massively appreciated the people telling their stories, because I was nervous doing this tonight, and I'm not usually scared of public speaking. So we really appreciate the people who've done their stories. What we're going to do is take a break, probably for like a month maybe. But what we're thinking we might do is launch later on in the summer an online alpha course, which would be like this kind of forum, like Zoom, but an opportunity for people to like really delve into, okay, so who is Jesus and what is he about? Not just our stories, like, because it's kind of secondhand, isn't it? Like, if you don't know Jesus, you're hearing our experiences of knowing Jesus. And there's a power to that, but it's not the same as you meeting Jesus. And so that's what we want to give people the opportunity to do, is to meet Jesus yourselves. And the Alpha course will be a really good way of doing that, in a way that like you can ask loads of different questions and like really grapple with this stuff. So that's a plug for what we're going to do later on in the summer.
Yeah, keep it posted.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
Good.
Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, don't be shy to give us a call, say hello. Just because Thursdays are ending, don't be a stranger. But yeah, we'll close it. Say goodnight. Thank you guys. Night.
Thanks guys. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.